Hello and welcome to How Do I Create a Report Using a Query in Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2. My name is Steven Renders. I am a Microsoft Certified Trainer for Microsoft Dynamics NAV and SQL Server, and I have created this video for you in collaboration with Microsoft and Plataan, a Microsoft Dynamics Solutions Training Center in Belgium. At the end of this video, you will understand how to create a report based upon a query object. So the objective of this video is to show how to use a query object as a data source in a report. I will do this in 3 steps. In step 1, we will create a query object for the customer sales data. In step 2, we will then use the query to build the dataset for the report. And in step 3, we will then build the report layout based upon the fields from the query object. So let's get started with the first step and create a query object for the customer sales data. So here we can see the query object that I prepared for this report, and it's a very simple query. I'm going to use the customer table as the first data item, and from the customer table, using the field menu, I have added, for example, the salesperson code, the country, region code, the city, number and name of the customer. Now I only want to show the number and the name of the customer, so what I did is actually I changed the salesperson, the country and the city into filter fields. Filter fields will not be available in the results of the query. They are actually used to be able to filter the query when using it. Then below I have a second data item which will fetch information from the customer ledger table. Here I am fetching the sales and the profit local currency, and for these two fields I've actually defined a totaling method of the sum, and I am grouping by number and name of the customer. In the properties of this data item, I'm using a data item link type exclude rows if no match. So if there is a customer without any ledger entries, it will not be available in the result set. Data item link is set to link the two tables using the number of the customer. That's basically it. Here in the properties of the query, what I've also done is I have entered a top number of rows to filter and only get back the 10 results. So we're going to make this a top 10 query. And I'm actually ordering by the total sales fields. So I will actually retrieve the top 10 customers according to the sales local currency, or basically the sum of the sales local currency in my query. So this is my query, and let's run the query to actually see the results. So here are the results of the query. I can see 10 customers with their number and name, and I can see the total sales and total profits. Now that we have seen how to create the query, let's have a look at how we can use this query to build the dataset for a report. So here we are in the object designer, and if I'm going to create a new report, the first thing that we have to do is select a data item. The data item can then become the data source of the report, but if we click on the data source, the only thing that we can use is actually a table. And here in the list of tables, we're not seeing any query objects. So to be able to use a query as a data source in a report, we're going to have to use a workaround. And I've prepared a report with the workaround already included. So let's have a look at this report. Now, what I've actually done is I have created a couple of variables, and one is actually a variable which is pointing to my query object. And I'm going to use this variable to fetch and request the results from the query. Then in my report, I'm basically using an integer table. This integer table, I've named it query results. I am using a data item table view so that it will not show up in the request page of the report. And what I've done is I've also created some variables. And let's have a look at these variables here: customer number, name, total sales and total profits, which are actually going to store the results from the fields in the query. And then I'm going to write a little bit of code to be able to access the fields from the query object. Let's have a look at the code here. Basically, in the onPre-data item trigger of my query, the first thing that I'm doing is I'm filtering the integer table from 1 to top x. Now topx is actually also a variable that I've included in my query object, and I've also created a request page so that the user is able to enter a number as a topx, and this topx will actually be used to filter the query dynamically. So it will not be filtered hard-coded on 10. Then I'm going to clear some variables. I'm going to use my topx field in the top number of rows filter of my query. And next I am going to use the open function. The open function on a query object will actually execute the query. Then I am going to actually loop over my 10 results, or can also be something else. And in the onAfter get record trigger of my integer data item, I'm going to use the read function to read one row of the query results. These results are coming in here in these fields from my query variable, and I'm going to assign them to the variables that I've added in the dataset. If there are no more records, then I'm going to clear my variables. Now, it might be the case that the user is, for example, selecting the top 20 for my query, but there are only, let's say, 16 results. In that case, I do not want the last 4 rows to be 0 in my query object. That's why actually I am keeping track of the number of results in my topx actual variable. And at the end of the execution of the query, I am closing the query. Close is a function that you have to use to close the query object. Now in our report, we also would like to have the captions of the query fields available. And to make it a better performing report, I'm not going to include them in this dataset. And what I'm actually doing is I have added an extra integer data item, which I have actually filtered on 1. And this filtering will take place here. And in this dataset, I am using the column caption field on my query variable for all of the fields from the query. And this way I'm adding them actually in an extra row in the dataset. Here at the end, I will also be adding my topx and the actual topx. Let's have a look at the execution and the results for this query object. So I'm just going to run my report. Then I'm going to say, for example, that I'm going to filter on 20 rows. I'm going to activate the result set feature, going to preview my report. At this moment there is no layout, but I'm able to access the dataset. And here in the dataset what we can see is that there are actually, in this case, a number of results coming in. I can see that I have the captions available, that I requested the top 20 of the customers, but there are only 16 rows that contains or contain results. So this is now my data set. In the beginning of the data set, I have all the fields from the query with the values available. Then I have a number of empty rows, and at the end, in the last row, I have the captions, and I can see my topx, my filters that I used in the query object. Now that we have seen how to use a query to build the dataset in the report, let's now use the query fields in the report layout. So let's go to the layout of the report. I am going to use Visual Studio to create the report layout. Next, once it's open, I am going to visualize the dataset. So I'm going to do this by going into the View menu, going to activate Report Data. Here I can see my results, I can see my caption fields, I can see my query fields. I'm just going to insert a table. And what I'm then going to do in my table is I'm going to use and enter the caption fields. So I'm going to use the number caption. Then I'm going to use the name caption in here. And next I will show the total sales. I'm going to insert a column to the right, and I'm going to show the total profit caption. And here I'm going to actually show the actual number. I'm going to use the actual name. I'm going to show the total sales and the total profits. Then I'm going to go to the properties of these two text boxes. I'm going to change the format into a custom format. I'm going to basically use my format for the sales in this text box, and I'm going to do it similarly for the profit text box. I'm going to create here another custom expression using the format function, which I'm also retrieving from my datasets. This I'm going to make bold. Then what I'm going to do is I am going to the properties of my table, and I'm going to actually include a filter. Now I'm going to filter my datasets, and I'm going to make sure that, for example, the number of the customer, which I'm going to convert into a string field, must not be, is going to be greater than the empty expression. So I'm filtering on only the result rows. So let's have a look at what we have at this moment. So if I'm going to save and run this report, I can see in this case my top 10. As you can see, I made a little mistake because I'm not showing the captions. Let's correct this. So I am going to empty these fields, and I am actually going to use an expression. And in my expression, I am going to fetch the caption. Now the caption in this case is going to be a part of the last record. So I am going to basically fetch the last record. I'm going to apply the same principle to all of these rows. So let's do this for the second column. I'm going to create an expression. I'm going to go to the dataset. I'm fetching the name, but it should come from the last row. I'm going to do it similarly for my total of the sales caption fields. I'm going to use the last one, and then I'm going to do it also in here for my total profits. So it's important that we use the last row in our dataset, because it's in that row that we basically have put the captions here in the last row of the datasets. So let's have a look now at the result of my reports, and as we can see, we can now see the captions. So let's go back to the report and enhance it a little bit more. And what I have done at this moment is, in the text box properties of the captions, I have enabled an interactive sorting. So if we click on the number, we'll sort on number. If we click on name, then we sort on name, and so on. Then I could also, for example, include a chart in this report. Let's, for example, create a nice pie chart. In this chart, we are going to show the total sales, and we are going to show the total profit, and we're going to do it basically by customer. And if I am going to create this type of chart, let's have a look at the results. So if I run the report, I am now able to sort on number, name, or any of the columns in here. And if you scroll down a little bit, we can see a chart appearing in which we are also going to see the top 10 of the customers. Of course, I also have to include the filter in this chart, not to show these the little empty rows, but you know how to do that. It's actually the same filter. Then we apply it in the table. Now, by creating this report, what we have done actually is we have almost rebuilt the customer top 10 report, or report 111, but in this case we have used a query object to fetch the results, which is basically much more performant than the standard object 111. Let's go over the steps once more. So in the first step, I created a query object in which I fetched information from the customer and the customer ledger entry table. Then in step 2, we added the query object via an integer data item and a little bit of programming to the report dataset designer. And we also added a dynamic top X filter. Next, in step 3, we created the layout of the report. We used a table and a chart and basically rebuilt the customer top 10 111 report by making use of a query object. Now in this case we replaced the data items by making use of a query object. What you can also do is you can combine the original table data items and query objects to increase the performance of existing reports. This briefly explains how to create a report based upon a query object. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something. And I hope to see you again in one of the other titles of the How Do I series for Microsoft Dynamics NAV 2013 R2.